person I'm going to introduce to you is our keynote speaker, and it is Warren Furutani. And he doesn't really need an introduction. He's one of the founders of the Manzanar Pilgrimage. He was a trailblazer in many ways, in education and redress. He actually passed legislation for diplomas for those denied their diploma degrees while they were incarcerated. So here I'd like to welcome Warren Furutani.
Oh my God!
I don't know when it happened. Mo, I don't know when it happened. But suddenly we became the elders and not the young people that came here in 1969. But looking around, it gives you a sense, not by Googling it, but a sense of what it must have been like to wake up every morning for 3, 4, 5 years and walk out the door of your barracks and look on to the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains. And although majestic and beautiful, if you can imagine the wind, the cold, the elements of that time, it gives you a sense that goes far beyond any two-dimensional computer screen or iPad screen to feel what it must have been like to be here in camp. I come today with my mother-in-law, Aiko Herzi Yoshinaga. A lot of you may know her because Aiko was one of the key researchers in the Coram Nobis case that overturned the Fred Korematsu case that was really historic in terms of civil rights law. But Aiko, the last time we were here when we visited the barracks, one was very pleased that the barracks were there so people would get a sense of it. But she said when she lived in the barracks, it was nothing like this. The wood was green wood, so it was cracked. There wasn't tar paper on the sides at those times, and so the wind blew through it. And she was newly married. So consummating her marriage in a barracks where only partitions were sheets that were hung from the walls, on top of mattresses that were filled with straw. And then as a young wife to become a new mother, she was in block 12 and had to walk from block 12 over to the hospital, which was quite a distance over uneven terrain, to have her daughter. Her daughter, my sister-in-law, who when driving up here today, we were all wondering, what does Jerry put down when she fills out an application when it says birthplace? Does she put Manzanar concentration camp? I was honored to be invited to speak today for many reasons. One of which was, of course, the 75th anniversary of Executive Order 9066. And all of us in this country of late have really become familiar with executive orders, have we not? But I'm also pleased to be here to set the record straight, because oftentimes we use individual names to determine how something took place or something happened, when you know none of this or any of it. I don't care if we're talking about the civil rights movement or any movement in social justice you talk about. It was never done by one person or two people or a handful of people. So when you talk about Manzanar, to set the record straight, a friend of mine and many of us here, Victor Shabada and I, had gone down to Oceanside to participate in an anti-war march outside the Marine base. Yeah, in those days we were pretty filled with piss and vinegar. We went right down to the source of where the war was being taken place. And of course, during the riot that took place in the aftermath, as there were bottles thrown and so forth and so on with the Marines, etc., we sat down and wondering if we had enough gas to get home, but we were determined to march somewhere, doggone it. The farm workers had marched to Sacramento. There was a Poor People's March in Washington. Where could we march to galvanize our community around an issue of civil rights and social justice? And we remembered, usually in hushed tones, at family gatherings, people would talk about camp. Camp. You remember camp. What block were you in? Did you know so-and-so that lived in block such and such? What camp were you in? So in hushed tones, it couldn't help but stir the curiosity of the generation that was born after camp. And we started asking each other about this issue of camp. So Victor and I came back and we had a whole coalition of organizations in the 60s. And we told them about this idea, and we were given the task to come and find out where Manzanar was. So we got some basic information. 1 mile outside of Lone Pine. If you hit Independence, you've gone too far. If you go to Mammoth Lakes, damn it, you're going fishing. So we were told there was a green building still erected, and that could be used as a landmark. So we drove up here. We saw a sign which we later stole. It said Manzanar Road. And it went east toward those mountain range. We turned and went east, and we found this area with asphalt, roads and dirt. And with our limited imagination, and more importantly, our limited information, we tried to fill in the blanks. This must have been where the barracks were, and these must have been the roads. And in the distance, we saw a pickup truck coming closer and closer, followed by a cloud of dust. And as they proceeded to come toward us, we could see in the back window of the pickup truck the gun rack and the guns. And then we saw the cowboy hats and the bandanas. And they pulled up on us, rolled down the window, and said, "What are you boys doing?" And as I said, we were filled with a lot of piss and vinegar in those days. And we responded that we're not boys, we're men, and we're here looking for the camps that racists like you put our ancestors in during World War II. And they started laughing. Now that really pissed us off. Oh, you guys are looking for the camps the Japanese were put in during World War II? Well, it's not east of Highway 395, it's west of 395. So had we not run into them, we would have not known where we really were. So we drove down this road over here that has been vastly improved, and I thank the National Park Service for that. But we went over sagebrush, we went through all kinds of different terrain, and as we got to this point over here and turned the corner, and we saw the eastern Sierra Nevada mountain range, what stood up like a beacon that drew us toward it, was that monument. And Victor and I, when we got to the cemetery, and I know you're not supposed to lead against the fence, but that fence shouldn't be there if I had my way. I didn't see one piece of barbed wire since I've been here. That used to be a barbed wire fence. And even though it had liability problems, I'm sure, for the Park Service, in itself it made a statement. Barbed wire. So as you look at this, in terms of looking at the history not only of the pilgrimage, that it involved many in my generation to come and ask the question, what were these camps? And then being blessed by being able to find people like Sue Embry, who started to fill in the blanks for us. And people like Edison Uno, who started to tell us the true stories. And women like Amy Ishii Uno, who told us what it was like with a passion that was unparalleled by the hushed tones that we were used to. So at the first pilgrimage, to show you that we did not know what we were doing, we came the Saturday after Christmas in December. You don't come to the upper Owens Valley in the last Saturday of December unless you're going past it to June Mountain to ski. It was the coldest time you can imagine. But here we got a sense, as the wind blew, as the grain of sand pelted our faces, as our mouths became dry because of the lack of moisture, we got a glimpse of what it might be like to be here for one day, for one afternoon, let alone 3 to 4 years. So as the story unfolds, when we came here, the Japanese American community didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to talk about camps. We were told it's better left forgotten. And I remember Ardishi's uncle Edison told us one time that it was like a rape victim. A rape victim, someone that's been raped, they don't want to tell the story over and over. They want to forget it. But it couldn't be forgotten, because as we came at the first pilgrimage and walked around, and we saw the burial sites, and we walked farther out and found a dump that held this remains of an archaeological dig almost, where you could see broken dishes that were dated from the time camps were here. And as we looked around and the story unfolded, every step of the way to get this to be a national park, a national monument, was a battle. I point to you when you leave to look at the bronze plaque at the front of the site of this camp, at the stone guardhouses. We fought with the State Historical Society on that wording. And this is back in the early 70s. People used the term internment camp, relocation center. But I always sensed, as did the movement for social justice, that if you really want to know what's going on, it's not a matter of being sympathetic to someone's plight. It's a matter of being empathetic, to walk in their shoes. So it's always a matter of perspective. If you're on the inside looking out or on the outside looking in. If you're on the outside looking in, you can call it a relocation center. You can call it an internment camp. You can call it an assembly center. But if you're on the inside looking out, even though you were told that you were being put in these camps for your own protection, and the logic was, why if they're being protected were the machine guns pointed in at us instead of out at whoever they were protecting us against? So it's always a matter of point of view and perspective. So we got that plaque in bronze to say concentration camp. Now, some people say that it gets confusing with the camps that Jewish people were put in during World War II. But if you ask Jewish Americans what they or their ancestors called those camps, they didn't call them concentration camps. They called them death camps. So it's perspective. Every step of the way it's been a battle. The redress reparations movement, led by groups like NCRR, led by groups like the Japanese American Citizens League, NCGR, all kinds of different organizations that fought the battle. The Congress people that we had in Congress at that time, that coalition of people that came together with the community at large. They're the ones that brought about just reparation. They're the ones that brought the president to the table to apologize. The community. When I passed the bill in the state legislature that conferred honorary degrees on Japanese Americans who were pulled out of their college education because they were incarcerated in camp, when the vote went to the floor, there was not one dissenting vote. It was unanimously passed because our community had educated people about this chapter of history. So every step of the way, it's been a battle to make sure that what we understand relative to history is a perspective and point of view that is reflected by those on the inside looking out. And I just spoke at and attended a fantastic event Thursday with the Venice Japanese American Memorial Monument Committee. They have placed a monument, a replication of that monument about 9 feet tall on the corner of Venice and Lincoln Boulevard. On the corner. And in their wording they say concentration camp. So whether here or there, the education that needs to go on is important relative to point of view and perspective, but goes so far beyond that. Because ultimately what makes this such a viable, important, credible act for you to get in your cars or on a bus and to drive 4.5 hours to come out here, and you're not going fishing. But the reason we organized the pilgrimage on the last Saturday of April is today's opening day for trout season. So we hope we at least get some Japanese American fishermen to come and stop by. But in terms of looking at that, the perspective from which its point of view is important, but the more important aspect is its current relevance today. The 75th anniversary of Executive Order 9066. Do you know that President Trump has put forth more executive orders in his first 100 days than any other president in United States history? And the reason you use an executive order is because then you don't have to go through the legislative branch. And you could talk about checks and balances, because at that time, as Alan Nisio said, no one stood up and said no to Executive Order 9066. But we learned from history, because if we don't, it will repeat itself. We learned from history. So when he did executive orders about banning immigration, stopping the movement of people from countries to this country that were majority Muslim nations, we knew that to make sure that didn't happen was that we had to stand up. Had people stood up to 9066 at that time, the only reason we would be here is to stop and have a bento and lunch, because we were going to go fishing up the road. There would be no other reason to be here. But with the orders that the president has tried to put forward, people have stood up, so you learn. You learn in government about the system of checks and balances. And in checks and balances, you have 3 branches of government. The judicial branches stood up, but they've stood up because they've had the support of the most important checks and balance system in democracy. It's not the 3 branches of government. The checks and balances that is the most important is the checks and balances in a democracy by the people of that democracy and their government. So although we're talking about a chapter in history, although we reach out and embrace our brothers and sisters of the Muslim faith, although maybe it's a good thing that everybody's preoccupied with Russia, because if they weren't, the government would be preoccupied with China and what's going to happen with Korea. If things happen in Korea, how are they going to tell if someone's a North Korean or South Korean immigrant to this country? Are they going to put all Koreans in camp? And I end with this. I talked about my mother-in-law in the Coram Nobis case that overturned the decision by Fred Kuromatsu relative to the constitutionality of putting Japanese Americans camped during World War II. The overturning of that decision was done in a lower court. The decision was made ultimately in 1942, 43, 44 by the Supreme Court. That decision is still on the books. It sits around like a loaded gun. A loaded gun aimed at whoever is being scapegoated at that particular time for whatever political problem may exist. So sisters and brothers, the work's not done. Sisters and brothers, the checks and balances that is most important in a democratic society is the check that the people put on its government. And that's what we have today. People not only resisting, people standing up, people making sure their voices are heard. People are putting their bodies on the line, and we're putting them on the line for everybody so that this never happens again to anyone. Power to the people. Thank you. Yeah.